as the title says, it's the crowd payment revolution. I'm here to talk about money movement. And I think a lot of people, I think over the days, I've been sitting through sessions all around. And I think I've heard some great stories. I mean, there are companies here who've built some great freelancing platforms like Freelancer, Airbnb, and so on, which has engaged a crowd around the world, providing services, and really building the whole crowdsourcing industry in general. There are crowdfunding companies, which have come out of India, they've come out of Asia in general, which have really sort of revolutionized the whole funding space where small companies can now go out and get money from wherever they want. And I'm here to talk about how the money moves around the world, because I think a lot of the times, if you look at payments in general, I think a lot of these platforms sort of have that at the back of their mind. And I think my goal today is to really bring that to the front of your mind so that you start looking at payments as an important sort of topic while you build your great platforms and while you do all these great things. And we're calling this crowdsourcing payments, actually. So if you look at payments in general, right? I mean, if you look at your user base, now your user base could sort of vary anyone from someone whom you're hiring in Bangladesh, in this case, to do some website design work through freelancer.com. Or you are a freelancing web portal, and you have people who work on your platform who, at the end of the day, are providing services and so on. So at any given point, money is moving two ways. Money is moving one way, where your clients who are coming and using your platform are actually paying you for the services. And then the other side is money is moving the other way when you have an obligation to pay a freelancer because of the services they provided you. So in this case, if you actually look at it, this particular freelancer who's sitting and designing websites is currently working on two major platforms. Let's take an example here. On one side, he's working for Elance Odesk, and the other side, he's working for Freelancer, both from two different parts of the world, providing the same exact services to freelancers and people around the world. In freelance marketplace A, the freelancer is getting paid through wire transfers. So let's take Elance, which is a company in the US, is paying him through wire transfers and sending him money through traditional sort of like bank mechanisms. And on freelance marketplace B, which is freelancer.com, the freelancer is getting paid through a new age sort of global payout platform, which I'm going to talk about as we move forward. So what are the common payment methods today? So if I'm a freelancer, I think at some point, I think some of you or all of us have worked as freelancers. And at any given point, I think the motivation for us is really to receive money and get paid for what we're doing. And I think a lot of the times, we as individuals, if you're not involved in the sort of like the banking space, we don't know exactly what are the local methods, how people can pay us. We know how to use a credit card. We know how to go to our bank and use our bank. But there are so many different types of payment methods available in the market today that it's a little challenging for people to understand. And what we are trying to do here is sort of like lay out some of the most common ones available in the market and which are widely used, so that you get sort of perspective about what it is for the freelancer to sort of receive and get the money paid. So if you look at it, there are e-wallets, and some people might say, what is an e-wallet? PayPal is an e-wallet. PayPal basically is has you, the freelancer, create an account, and then has the company, i.e. Elance Odesk, create an account, and both those monies come into a trust account, which you see from an online, so you can go in and you can check your virtual balance, but essentially the money is sitting into somebody else's account, and it's an electronic wallet. So that's one way. That's one of the methods. I think a lot of people I've actually met here. Either you're a new company, you're an established company. I think a lot of you today are actually using PayPal as a mode of payout for your freelancers. Bank wire transfers. I was talking to someone, I think I was talking to JJ at Airbnb yesterday, And one of the things what he said is most of the Airbnb hosts today get paid by wire transfers through third-party platforms. And bank wires is sort of like the traditional way. And I think Paul, who was here before us, and I think he gave us an example, and he said $120, he tried to send it to New Zealand, he sent a bank, $40 disappeared, and by the time the money reached New Zealand, it was about $60, $80 what was received by the receiver. So bank wire transfers that's what it is that you actually go to your bank, they create a swift wire transaction, and the money goes to whichever account the money has to go in whichever country. And I'm going to get into a little bit of that as we move forward. International prepaid cards. There are a lot of prepaid cards available in each country, but there is a new breed of international cards or prepaid cards which have started, where a lot of people, there are a few companies out of the US and maybe Europe who basically send out prepaid cards to your freelancers denominated either in dollars or euros, because those are the two major currencies you could make prepaid cards in. And then these cards are expedited out to your freelancer, and then you deposit the funds on the freelancer's card, and the freelancer uses the card in the local country. So essentially, if you think of it, think of yourself. If you have a debit card, and if you're from the US or Europe, and you're sending your US or European debit card to a freelancer in Bangladesh, just think about the costs of how that is going to look like. And last but not the least, cryptocurrencies. I mean, there are a bunch of cryptocurrencies today, the most popular one being Bitcoin. Bitcoin, I think overall, I think a lot of people are just getting used to it now. I think it hasn't really come into the whole crowdsourcing space, at least from a payments perspective. A lot of e-commerce companies have started to use it, and I think the technology is great, but there is still more to learn in the space, and I think people still have to grasp and actually apply that to their day-to-day lives. And bank wire transfers. I think I would like to sort of like debunk a lot of the myths, what is out there, because a lot of the times, when I talk to people, and I've been doing this for over 15 years, I've come from a banking space. I've worked at a bank. I've done a lot of things in the financial space, and I think people, especially as the crowdsourcing space is growing, and I think a lot of people today are working around the world, and there are no borders, there are no boundaries. I think people have to understand what a bank transfer really means, so that when you launch your business or when you're doing your business, it makes sense for you to actually talk to your bank in a way in which they understand, and not just in a layman's term. So if you look at a bank wire transfer, right, you, the company, go to your bank, and you could be in New York, you could be in London, you could be in Singapore, you could be anywhere. And essentially, you go to your bank, and then your bank basically charges you a fee and tells you, okay, it's going to charge you $25 to send you money to XYZ country. Now, essentially, they take the instruction, they ask you, give me your details of who you want to send the money to. And either it could be from an individual standpoint, it could be through a batch, or it could be through an online portal. Essentially, you just have to give them their bank account details. And those bank account details are then parsed through a clearing system, which every country has. So in the US, US has two major clearing systems, which are owned by JP Morgan and Bank of America. And then when the payments come into a clearing system, what happens is the clearing system basically absorbs the payment and spits it out as a message. It's like a 30-line message which goes out to correspondent banks. And you probably must have heard at some point in your life that, we had to pay correspondent bank fees because of XYZ reasons. So the local clearing system goes into the correspondent bank. So at every step, so you've been charged a fee, right? So the local clearing system in a country, or the banks which operate these local clearing systems, charge a fee. And the correspondent bank on the other side of the world, which typically today and now in the UK, like Barclays, acts like a big correspondent banking hub. So correspondent banking A it charges a fee, and then correspondent B then parses the payment into a local clearing system. Now the correspondent B bank can be in any of the receive countries, or it could be in some random country. For example, when we do, and when I used to do a lot of bank payments, a lot of the times payments would go from New York to London, from London to Europe, typically to Germany, to Frankfurt, to the Deutsche Bank, and then would go through another European entity before it would actually go into Asia. So you're talking about Swift messaging, because the messaging system actually is, if you look at traditional sort of like bank wires, the technology and the process was laid out about 50 years ago. So for the last 50 years, bank wires have not changed. The front-end technologies have changed, but bank wires have not changed. So money is moving around the world, but still sort of like on basic traditional technology. So now you sort of like see the payment going, and now let's take an example with Singapore, for example. Singapore has a great clearing system. Singapore is still a small country, but banks within Singapore are all connected through a local clearing system. So correspondent B bank, because they have a correspondent relationship in Singapore, they basically push the transaction in the local clearing system. So now, as soon as the local clearing system in Singapore receives the money, they charge a fee. So now, ultimately, in about 2 or 3 days, 4 days, sometimes even 7 days, the money finally reaches the person's bank account. So the person whom you intended to pay has received the money. And now, as Paul gave you an example, I think that's sort of standard across the board. If you're going to pay somebody $200, $300, $400, there is going to be a cost to it, because banks are not going to move your money for free. There is going to be a fee through the chain, and then ultimately when the money actually reaches the person, he is going to receive less money than what you intended to send him. And the reason I'm sort of like going through this process is that if you look at crowdsourcing space in general, look at all these big companies, Airbnb, Freelancer, Elance, Odesk, and everybody else. Your typical crowdsourcing payment is in the $200 range. It doesn't matter where in the world you are. And nobody's going to pay you big amounts. And a big amount can be up to $10,000, but in banking terms, $10,000 is a retail payment. And retail payments usually end up costing more money to the company, which is sending the funds, and more money to the recipient who's receiving the funds. So this is a study which we do all the time. Payments is what we do. And if you look at our payments, and we did a study, and we looked at multiple banks around the world. We today work with about 15,000 banks around the world who basically process payments for us. So when you look at bank wire transfers, and you as a company from a crowdsourcing perspective, have to understand that, as I said, there are correspondent fees. So if you're going to send, let's take an example here of just $300 to a country. You're paying 1.3% in correspondent fees, 4.8% in bank transfer fees, and then there is something called beneficiary deductions or landing fees, and you probably must have heard that, there is a landing fee for them to receive the money. And then FX spreads. Foreign exchange is a huge, huge market, and I think at any given point, foreign exchange is a big contributor to a bank's income, and then you, as an individual, are paying to add to the bank's revenue source. At the end of the day, you're really about around 12.4% in fees. So if you, in sort of like costs to you, and also cost to the receiver, and so that's a pretty sizable cost when you look at bank transfers as a viable option if you want to grow your business globally. E-wallets, PayPal. I think PayPal is a favorite for everybody here because everybody loves working with PayPal. And I think, but the devil is in the detail. And we've done some study in the past, and we do that now. E-wallets in general are great. Like you could send money to someone just with an email address. But there is a lot which goes in the background, which you probably have experienced, and then the receiver experiences, because it's an important sort of like chain, so that you sort of like connect with each other. So a typical PayPal user, in this case, let's take an example with simple as maybe even Philippines, for example, right? I am a Filipino freelancer, and I'm working on your platform. And the company, is going to send you, the Filipino freelancer, money. And you will say, okay, just pay me into my PayPal account. What that really means is that when you load a PayPal account, there is usually a fee which they charge you. It might be a really small amount, but then when the money actually is in the account, what happens is at some given point, if I'm a Filipino worker, I need to withdraw the money from my PayPal account so that I could actually use it for my day-to-day use. So in the Philippines now, so if I have to move the money from my PayPal to my local account, again, you have to go through the same banking channels which we discussed with SWIFT, but now this becomes a local challenge, but then PayPal doesn't make it local. PayPal keeps on adding fees to the whole service. So there are correspondent banking fees, there is transfer fee, there is a landing fee, a beneficiary deduction, there is an FX spread, and then the total cost is about 8.4%. So at any given point, if you today are paying anybody through PayPal, and if this person is actually going to use the money out of their PayPal account and into the physical world, I think this is what needs to be kept in mind so that you are sort of well educated about what your freelancer is really getting by using PayPal. So that's something which I think will hopefully help the audience here in looking at PayPal from a slightly different angle. International prepaid cards, and I think I just touched on it, is that just imagine if you're a U.S. resident or a European resident and you were paying somebody in a different part of the emerging market, you were paying them, you're sending your own debit card to this person and having them use it. I mean, I don't know how many of you, while you're in Singapore, might have used your debit card to go to the ATM and pick up cash. I have done it, at least in the last 2 days. And I did pay a fee to withdraw the money, and I did pay a very bad exchange rate by the local bank to withdraw the money. So just imagine doing that with your freelancers who've now spent 30 hours a week working on your project. They expect, I mean, again, at some point you might think, oh, it's $500, but $500 is a lot of money. And I'll give you an example later, but freelancers really look at this and they really nickel and dime this whole process because it becomes very important because this is their sort of some cases main source of income. So international prepaid cards have loads of fees, and I don't even need to get into most of these because I think most of us have experienced some of it at some point. But there are activation fees. If you're sending an international card, there are monthly fees, and at any given point, you have to pay a certain set fee to just have the card. And then there are loading fees. So every time you load money on the card, you're paying a fee, and the receiver's paying a fee. There's a withdrawal ATM sort of charge, at any point. There's a foreign exchange spread again. So all these sort of like have common denominators in some ways. It's just a different mode of sending a payment. But then at the end of the day, there are huge costs to it. I don't know how much I can talk about Bitcoins, but Bitcoins, I think, overall has had a great technology infrastructure to it, and I think it's going to help a lot of companies in the future, hopefully, to move money around the world. Global trends, I think today from an emerging market perspective, right? So if you look at crowdsourcing in general, what we've seen, and we have had experience with companies around the world, and we see there is a huge surge in the crowdsourcing sort of like freelancer space in these countries. I mean, the US is definitely one of the top countries when freelancers are working. But if you look at emerging markets, those ones which are ticked in green are the ones which really are adding people day by day to this network, and at the end of the day, which are going to help you as crowdsourcing companies to be successful in whatever you're doing. We as a company, we are not a small company. We move a lot of money around the world. Last year alone, we processed close to $4 billion into the emerging markets, and we've done this by taking a lot of let's say business from the banks, so that the banks could benefit, or freelancers could benefit from our services and so on. I'm running out of time, but so technology today, I mean, if you look at the challenge, overall, all of us, the challenge is we're really progressing and we're really building technologies which are so far ahead of its times in some ways. And then there is connectivity. I think everybody in this world is connecting through devices, through everything. I think the expectation is becoming stronger and stronger when it comes to delivery of message and delivery of services around the world. Emerging payment solutions, I think overall you have to sort of like look at solutions which are directly available in local countries. And I think there are a few companies in the world who can connect you to local freelancers directly without you using bank wires and prepaid cards and so on. And if anybody wants to know more about this, I can definitely share more with you as later in the day. But I think paying smart, I think if you're going to pay anybody in the world, I think you have to really make sure that you are asking the right questions. I mean, if you're working with anybody, if it's a third-party platform, if it's a bank, and of course it's a bank, you have to ask them about, what their licenses are, if they're a self-owned bank network, do they provide FX capabilities? Because all of these things, all of these main points actually add up to your cost when you actually are sending them money, and there is a huge benefit for you to actually ask these questions to your provider. What to ask again? These are the most convenient payment options, and how long will it take before payments are received? I think timing-wise, timing of payments is also really important. Overall, I think asking the right questions, making sure that your freelancers are connected in a way in which they are not paying a lot of money to you or to receive the money. And I think overall, if you do this, I think freelancers today will really appreciate your platform and would come back to your platform again and again to provide this service. If there is anything else you'd like to know, I'll be happy. I'm just out of time, so I'll let everybody
Great.
go.
Thank you, Rahul.
Sure.
Appreciate that. Let's open 2 questions here.
Hi, thank you very much for that presentation, very insightful. I had one question. So looking at the total cost, I saw that about a third of it was FX spread. So is there any way that Transpay addresses this issue, or are there other businesses which address this spread issue?
So yeah, Transpay, I can talk about Transpay is that we've built a network around the world which basically is our direct own network. So it's a proprietary network. Now, from foreign exchange perspective, what happens is that at any given point, we manage our own treasury. So because when you go to the other payment methods out there, there are multiple hands sort of like touching the transaction. So foreign exchange usually becomes a costly, sort of like expensive. So in our way, because we have our own treasury teams, we have treasury teams in New York, in the UK, in the Philippines, and so on. So we manage our own treasury, so we reduce that FX spread, and we give the receiver the most accurate FX rate when they receive the funds.
Etienne?
Yes. What about TransferWise? How do you position yourself here, TransferWise?
So TransferWise, firstly, it's a new entrant in the market. They are just a marketing engine to a payments company called Currency Cloud. Their model sounds good on paper, but we've done this and we process more payments than TransferWise. So it looks good on paper, but at the end of the day, it's not sustainable. And if you have ever tried TransferWise outside of Europe, you will see that the payments don't get delivered on time. It takes days for them to deliver the funds, even though what their marketing says is what it is, but the actual fees and the cost of the service is much, much more higher. And I think we don't position ourselves against TransferWise because we don't even consider them like in the crowdsourcing space in general. But then it's like comparing an apple to an orange.
How long does it take for the receiver to get the money through Transpay?
So Transpay, we've built sort of superior technologies where, for example, about 3 years ago, Elance Odesk is a client of ours. They had issues paying into countries like Pakistan, Philippines, Indonesia, and so on. Now we've built certain technologies. At that time, they had issues where it would take them 7 days to pay the freelancer. with our technology, we are able to pay them the same day or the next day directly into their bank account in the local currency. So a country like Pakistan is traditionally, it's very difficult to work because of the sort of like desegmented sort of like banking network there. So we've sort of like gone out and we've created networks around the world where we can pay in real time. So in countries like Philippines, we have ability to pay out in real time into bank accounts, where it would usually take about 3-4 days for the freelancer to receive the money.
And what is the typical fees that Transpay?
So today, our fee structure is actually I've got this feedback saying that it's too good to be true, but we are actually in the few dollar range, and that's just literally the fee. You don't pay anything else. So what we've seen is that a lot of the time, when I was talking about all these fees, I think we want to make it simple. We want freelancers to sort of like appreciate, be appreciated for the work they've done. And I think, but by taking away all the extra excessive fees and offering them one single fee, and and today most of our clients pay us like literally $2 or $3 for a transaction, and then we actually make sure that the funds are delivered and take on the responsibility of the whole chain at the end.
So it's pretty much like what Singapore has with this nets. You don't pay based on the amount of what the amount is. You just pay like one particular fee, right?
Exactly.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, but then we've translated that experience to a global experience.
Right.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Anyway, Raul, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
Thanks for everything. And if you want to connect with Raul, please do after during a coffee break.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. And there's a little gift for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for